welcome back to another Just 5 Mins. Yep, it's kicking off 2025 with yet more AI. Um, well, of course it is. I mean, that's what we're all talking about all the time now, aren't we? So what have we got today? We have both of these are from Microsoft, but they're open source, and there is a bit of a split with one of them, and I'll explain in a second. But the first bit is Magentic One, a generalist multi-agent system for solving complex tasks. Okay, so it's open source, and as of the time of this, anyway, from me looking at it, it's Python, but you can download or fork the GitHub repository, and essentially it ends up doing. I think what Anthropic Claude has been doing, and a few others, where it's a bit dangerous, but if you've got the right use case and the right permissions, this thing can do things like code, analyze its own code. So it's a multi-agent framework. Okay, but it's got some very specific things. So things like file server. So it can, again, if you want it to, with permissions, it's got a file server sort of component where it can read files off your disk. And this isn't just local. This could be on your server. Again, it's got some good security principles in place, but as usual, all with a caveat. I'll stop mentioning that now, because just assume that that's what you're just going to have to use your common sense, aren't you? Let's face it. But it's got the file server, so it can look at files like PDFs or raw text files, images, whatever it might be. It can then do something with that. So this is where the multi-agent bit comes in. So it can say, well, okay, I'm going to look for these files. I'm going to do this with it. I'm going to do that with it. I'm going to check that. I'm going to, upload that to a website, whatever it's going to do. So I think, this is what, they've been talking about for a while. And again, I was listening to Mark Benioff from Salesforce, actually, about Agent Force, that's their biggest thing that they've done since launching the company, really. So I think agents, but how they're used and really what use cases you have for them is going to become important, because all the stuff that I've been seeing, it's all great, but it's all quite mundane sort of stuff, like checking your calendar and doing this and whatever. And I think there's some really interesting things there. I'm not diminishing that, but certainly from a business perspective, this is quite interesting. So it's got a file surfer, not server. So it can grab data and do things with it. It's got a web server as well. So it can actually go out to the web and do stuff and scrape code and all that sort of stuff. Again, don't even bother explaining about what the permissions and what the ethical things are there. But if it's on the web, it's public, well, you can, that's what you're doing when you look at the darn thing, isn't it? But it has like I say, it's got the coding aspects, so you can actually ask it to build code, but also check code, all that sort of stuff. So I've seen some examples where, as people commit a change to GitHub, you can use Magentic One to go and actually look at that code and comment on it and check against certain metrics. But it's also got things like a terminal as well, so it can open. I said I wasn't going to say it, but I will. It can open up a terminal and execute commands and do all this sort of stuff. But again, just use your common sense. Don't, I'm not worried about this, because it comes down to you just being sensible about what you want to achieve and what your use case is, and making sure that you've got all the security boundaries in place. Okay, so Magentic One, it's a few months ago that this sort of started to come out, but it's already got some traction. But interestingly, it's part of an Autogen main GitHub repository. Okay, so sorry, a little bit of a blip there. So Autogen I've covered before. It's another agentic framework by Microsoft Research. It's interesting. It was developed through Microsoft research, but there was a lot of people from outside of Microsoft contributing. And again, it's got a Python SDK, but also a .NET SDK. And it has indeed got aspects like Magento One, okay, but you can do a lot more stuff with Autogen on its own, and I guess Magentic One is sort of like getting bolted in there to do specific things. But Autogen has got it's got, I've forgotten what they call it. Is it not Flow, Autogen Flow? But it's basically a UI where you could design your agentic workflow. Okay. Um, but the reason I mention that anyway is that I think a few months ago, the original sort of contributors, founders of Autogen, sort of split. And I don't think there was any bad blood. I watched an interview with a couple of the main people, and they were just saying, like everything, Microsoft, like any other massive organization, have got managerial type stuff going on, this, that, and the other, and all the rest of it. And so anyway, so AG2 is the branch of Autogen, which those original founders are going with, but the original Autogen repository is still maintained open source by Microsoft. So read into that as you will. It's in some ways a little bit unfortunate because I'd sort of started to put a lot of effort into Autogen because I think for me personally, going up against other agentic frameworks like LangChain or Crew AI or any of the plethora of others, the Autogen one, because it seems to have got a good background, it's got a good grounding, it's got a lot of people focusing on it. I don't know quite which branch to go on with. Now, a lot of people say, oh, I'm open source, so I'm going to go that way. And I don't blame people, by the way, I'm not judging, but it's just that, realistically, when it comes to deploying this stuff in commercially or in a business sense, you want the best chance of this thing staying around and being solid and to build on and get all the extra lovelies that you probably would need. So anyway, but the point being is that Magentic One, even on its own, is pretty ridiculous what you can actually do with it. As I say, you can write it into your own apps. It can, for better or worse, access your terminal, access code, access files, access the web. But again, just use your common sense. It's simple as that, really. But anyway, that's what I've got for this time around. It's an interesting sort of like for 2025, because the world of agents is only going to be getting more and more and better, I think, or worse and worse, depending on your perspective. So that's what I've got for the start of 2025. So have a good week, have a good weekend, and we'll catch you on the next one.